it's fine with you if we start now, Haruko? Great. So let's now officially launch this event. There are still seats here close to the table. We are keeping them for stakeholders and not from the International Environment House, but feel free to come closer if needed. So Excellencies, dear delegates, dear colleagues, Happy New Year to those we haven't yet had the occasion to greet. Welcome to this event organized by the Secretariat of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora in collaboration with the Geneva Environment Network. Today's briefing will focus on the preparations of the upcoming 78th meeting of the Standing Committee of the Convention that is taking place already next week. And it is an important milestone as this is the last meeting before the 20th meeting of the CITES Conference of the Parties that is going to be held in Uzbekistan in November this year. Before we formally start, let me mention for who has joined us online that throughout the event you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We'll use them to feed the discussion after the presentations. A transcript is also available in over 100 languages for who has joined us online as shown in the current slide. Let me remind finally everybody that the video of this event, the presentations and the summary will be made available as usual on the webpage of the event. We had announced in the program that the chair of the Standing Committee and the Secretary General of the Convention will be with us in person this morning. Both felt sick abroad and are only landing later today or tomorrow in Geneva. So to formally open this event, CITES Secretary General has pre-recorded a message that we will now show on the screen. And Ms. Haruko Kuso, who is the chief of the governing body's unit of the convention, will take the floor immediately after Ms. Higuero and guide you throughout the event. So without further ado, let my colleague screen the video.
Good morning. Allow me to express our warm welcome to those of you in the room and online, and our deep appreciation for attending this briefing on the 78th meeting of the CITES Standing Committee that will take place from 3 to 8 February at the CICG in Geneva. These briefing sessions were originally designed for the Geneva-based permanent missions, but now with hybrid technology, it is open to all, ensuring broader participation and engagement. Excellencies, colleagues, today environmental concerns often compete with other global crises, making it more important than ever to reinforce the role of CITES as a convention that balances conservation with trade, economy, and people. CITES makes a unique contribution to addressing the triple planetary crisis: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. The CITES strategic vision aims for a world where all wildlife trade is sustainable, legal, and traceable. This aligns very closely with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as strengthening cooperation with other multilateral environmental agreements and global initiatives is critical for achieving our shared conservation objectives. You may be aware that the Standing Committee plays a critical role in the functioning of CITES, guiding the implementation of the Convention between the meetings of the Conference of the Parties. The specific roles include providing policy guidance, overseeing the management of the Secretariat's budget, coordinating the work of other committees and working groups, carrying out tasks given to it by the Conference of the Parties, and drafting resolutions for consideration by the Conference of the Parties. The upcoming meeting is particularly significant as it is the last meeting before the 20th meeting of the CITES Conference of the Parties, or COP20, taking place at the end of this year in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. As you will hear from my colleagues today, the agenda for SC78 is extensive, with over 120 working documents to be able to be covered in the 6 days of the meeting. We have counted 191 proposed new decisions that must be considered for forwarding to COP20. This reflects the increasing complexity of CITES issues and the growing number of species listings, trade measures, and compliance matters that parties must tackle. This also means an expanding workload for the Secretariat in supporting the parties in their implementation. With more species listings, there are more party requests for assistance, and these greater implementation needs will require increased support. The Secretariat, as always, stands ready to support all parties, and particularly those facing multiple compliance issues or those struggling with limited capacity, to better implement the Convention while undertaking our daily duties of facilitating the negotiations and maintaining the information resources of the Convention. This, of course, requires human and financial resources, and the triennial budget to be adopted at COP20 will also be discussed during the meeting. I would like to take the opportunity to announce the wonderful news that Turkmenistan has joined CITES as its 185th party, and the convention has entered into force there on 2nd January 2025. We hope that SC78 will be the first standing committee meeting Turkmenistan attends as a party, making its formal participation in the work of the convention. Now, allow me to emphasize again that SC78 marks the final step where the committee will review the progress made during this intersessional period and make recommendations to COP20. And because we are ramping up our preparations for COP20, next week we are honored to have the presence of His Excellency Aziz Abdulkakimov, Minister of Ecology, Environmental Protection, and Climate Change of the Republic of Uzbekistan. His Excellency the Minister will present his plans for hosting COP20 in Samarkand. This will be an important moment to hear directly from Uzbekistan on their vision for a successful and impactful COP. Finally, with 185 parties and covering more than 41,000 species of wild plants and animals, achieving the goals of CITES requires strong collaboration and collective commitment. Given the scarce resources available, both for the permanent committees and the parties, prioritization is essential. Your focus should be on making SC78 as impactful and efficient as possible. The discussions must be solution-oriented, with a clear emphasis on well-founded recommendations that will guide the work of CITES moving forward. Only in this way, you will reach your ambitious environmental objectives for people and planet. Many thanks to my colleagues for their presentations and the hard work of the entire Secretariat. I am sorry that due to illness I cannot be with you today, but feel free to ask questions to my colleague on the subjects of SC78. I wish you all an enlightening briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to participants who are present here from the missions, as well as those who are online. My name is Haruko Okusu, and I'm the Chief of the Governing Bodies Unit, taking on this role since August last year. I have been working with the Secretariat for over 10 years, but this will be a new role for me. I'd just like to give you the outline of today's briefing. I would like to give you some practical information and logistical information about the Standing Committee meeting that will take place next week, followed by a couple of key points about the meeting that you may be interested in. So we would like to take turns as different units, a couple of the points or agenda items that are under our respective responsibilities that we think you may be interested in taking note. So it may not be in the cluster as you had hoped, or it may have some logical lack of flow, but this for practical reasons that we will be taking turns to speak on different key points of the meeting. First, I'd like to give you some highlights on the practical information. First of all, I have the website for the meeting that's on the top of the presentation screen that is available right now, where agenda and all of the working documents are available. We have just also published an annotated agenda as information document, which would also may aid in your preparation for the meeting. The dates and times of the Standing Committee meeting next week will be from Monday, the 3rd of February until the Saturday, 8th of February. This time we will have the meeting taking place for 6 days up to Saturday. And the times of the meeting would take place from 9 o'clock to noon for the morning session and from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., from 1400 to 1700 for the afternoon session. I'd also like to note that in-person registration will start on Sunday, on the 2nd of February from 2 p.m. The venue will be at the International Conference Center, Geneva, CICG, in Rue Varambe, as it has been with the previous Standing Committee meetings. The meeting will have interpretation in English, French, and Spanish, which are the working languages of the convention. It would also be live streamed in English only on the CITES YouTube channel. This has also been a tradition of the convention for the last couple of years, so that you will be able to follow the proceedings of the meeting live on our YouTube channel. In terms of the registration, parties have been requested to register no later than 27th of January. Sorry, it says 2024, but 27th of January 2025, according to Rule 2 of the Rules of Procedure. However, if there are any parties that have not registered and would like to do so, we'd like to encourage you to do that as soon as possible. And we should be able to try to accommodate you in the meeting room. However, you may not be in the order of the parties, and there may be some difficulties in providing you with a microphone that's connected to your party name. Also, with the credentials, they were supposed to have been submitted by email by yesterday, 27th of January. However, credentials submitted on site is still available. So we'd like to also encourage you to make sure that your parties do send in their credentials so that they may participate in full. For media accreditation, this can be done on the form on the meeting webpage. Now, turning to some of the statistical information about the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee of CITES. As of Friday last week, we have 748 individuals who have registered, of which 476 individuals are representatives of the government, which is one of the highest registered meeting for CITES Standing Committee meetings. We, at the moment, have registration from 87 parties and 110 observer organizations. We also have 127 working documents, and in terms of proposed decisions, we have a total of 201. This is in addition to the 191 new decisions that the CITES Secretary General has mentioned in her speech, plus decisions that are coming from the Animals and Plants Committees, which have not been added to the new decisions that are being proposed at the Standing Committee meeting. So we can appreciate that this is one of the meetings that have the biggest number of agenda items, biggest number of proposed decisions for the Standing Committees to consider. One of the biggest number of observer organizations that have registered, and one of the biggest number of individuals registered. So we will have to make do to make sure that we do cover all of the agenda items and also accommodate all of the participants as much as possible. We have therefore put in some measures for time efficiency and effectiveness of the meeting, which is a little bit experimental for our convention. These measures are outlined in notification to the parties number 2025-005 that was issued earlier this month. And these involve, first of all, intervention time limits that have been now posed, which are 3 minutes for Standing Committee members, 2 minutes for observer parties and organizations. There may be exceptions that are provided by the chair of the Standing Committee, including for parties who need to make an intervention on behalf of a party that are subject to compliance measures. There may be other exemptions that are granted by the chair of the Standing Committee. But we will try to put in a timer from the beginning of the meeting to make sure that all parties and all stakeholders do have the time to be able to intervene. We would, however, like to encourage especially the observer parties and observer organizations to consolidate their interventions as much as possible so that we may be able to give all of the different views some time for the interventions. We have also published a consolidated agenda item on the subject matters that are led by the Animals and Plants committees. So there's a single agenda item that consists of multiple documents that need to be led through, and this will be proceeded in a way that's a little bit different from usual, in that the Animals and Plants Committee chairs will quickly introduce each of the agenda items where the Animals and Plants Committees have actually referred to the Standing Committee for recommendations, and this will be again reviewed by the Standing Committee in the order that it is introduced. There may also be some impromptu changes to the working program with regard to the time that's available, also the complexity of some of the discussions that may take place. So while we have published a working program of the meeting, there may be some last minute changes that could take place by the Standing Committee Chair, and we'd like you to also please be attentive to any of the changes that may be made, and we would like to also apologize for any inconvenience that may be causing as a result. But this will be also in order to really look for time efficiency and effectiveness of the meeting, considering that there's a lot of agenda items. Again, I'd like to repeat that there is an annotated agenda that has been published this morning, and this consists of all of the recommendations and the new proposed decisions that are at the end of each of the working document. So this will be a summary document of all of the working documents with regard to what the Standing Committee members are requested to consider. So please pay attention to that document if possible. Now, I would like to move to a couple of agenda items that are under the responsibility of the governing bodies unit that you may be interested in looking at more deeply, that we think may be key issues. First of all is document number 10 on emerging operational matters of the committees. This document deals with issues on how to handle operational challenges like the one that we have had during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had disruptions in holding CITES committee meetings. This has been a discussion that has been going on for a couple of standing committee meetings. In this document, we have now proposed a structured risk assessment approach using a risk matrix for determining when to hold online or hybrid meetings, when to switch from a physical meeting or postponing a physical meeting and into holding online and hybrid meetings. We also have proposed conditions for online or hybrid meetings and guidelines for meeting arrangement in those cases, which includes issues such as timings and the use of different hybrid and online technologies. We have received inputs from parties and stakeholders on these documents, and we have tried to implement as much as possible the inputs that have been received. Also, we have raised as a new issue that there is an increasing workload for the committees resulting from the increasing agenda items and increasing working documents that are being proposed to meetings such as this one. And perhaps we may need to start exploring ways to address this working load. The Standing Committee under this agenda item is invited to agree on using these established approaches and guidelines and on an intersessional decision-making procedure on organization of intersessional work. The next agenda item that I'd like to highlight is document number 14 on CITES strategic vision. This document highlights the linkages between the CITES strategic vision and the adopted Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, especially with regard to the mapping between the two linkages. There's also a proposed amendment to Resolution Conf 18.3 on CITES Strategic Vision 2021 to 2030 in order to reflect these recent global policy developments, not just with the KMGBF, but other global policy developments. There's also a proposed amendment to Resolution Conf 16.4 on cooperation of CITES with other biodiversity-related conventions in order to ensure long-term contribution of the KM Global Biodiversity Framework and its monitoring framework to the CITES strategic vision. The Standing Committee is also requested to consider the need to continue developing new or revised indicators for Objective 1.4 of the CITES strategic vision, especially focusing on the alignment of CITES appendices with species conservation needs. The last item that I would like to highlight from my unit is document number 16 on cooperation with MEAs, multilateral environmental agreements, and other international organizations. This document highlights some existing partnership activities, such as the Bern 3 Conference on Synergies, led by UNEP, CMS, UNEA, CBD COPs, and so on. There are also some collaborative partnerships that the CITES Secretariat has been involved in, especially on wildlife management, as well as collaborative partnership on forests, as well as partnership with World Organization for Animal Health. There has also been sectoral cooperation, especially on law enforcement, trade issues, and regional cooperation. The document also presents a draft partnership strategy, which focuses on higher strategic level partnerships, which should contribute to the objectives, mandate, and missions of the Convention. Also, it reports on how the draft has been revised with comments from parties and observers, which have been integrated to the current revised version. There's also attention to the application of different rules and regulations that are necessary for the strategy document, as well as alignment with relevant UNEP policies, including the UNEP partnership policy that is being finalized at the moment. And there's also a recommendation for the Standing Committee to allow the Secretariat to submit the strategy for approval at COP20. I think that concludes the presentation from myself, and I'd like to now introduce Mr. Salehin Khan, who is the Acting Chief of the Outreach and Projects Unit, who will highlight some of the agenda items under his unit.
Thank you, Ms. Haruko Kusu. Good morning, everyone. As introduced by Haruko, I'm the Acting Chief of the CITES Outreach and Projects Unit. Now, this unit actually combines a number of cross-cutting issues, including project management. We also look at the elephants issues and a number of other issues, for example, digitalization. We look at the access to funding, etc. So my presentations is going to be basically covering all that, but I have only picked the important key agenda items because there's a lot of the agenda items that needs to be covered. So I've only picked and combined some of the topics that I've just mentioned. So first of all, let's start with the very important topic of elephants. There are a number of interrelated agenda items on elephants at this Standing Committee meeting. I'm going to only speak about only one, and not all the ones that is listed over there. So the first one is agenda item 65.1, which talks about the implementation of Resolution Conf 10.1 Ref Conf 19, which is basically the implementation of the MIC program, monitoring illegal cleaning of elephants. And as you probably would know, that this is a major issue for conservation. And this program actually identifies hotspots for illegal killing of elephants, both in Africa and Asia. Now, this program also provides a lot of important information trends on illegal killing of elephants. And the document shows that there's a downward trend in the illegal killing of elephants. However, it's not enough. The conservation status of both African and Asian elephants still remains a concern. And for that matter, we need international cooperation partnerships. And with regard to that, we have the African Elephant Action Plan supported by the African Elephant Funds, which plays a central role in mobilizing resources and driving conservation actions. That's why this agenda item is quite important for this elephant conservation. Now, another topic with regards to the financial and operational sustainability is actually highlighted also in this document of the MIC program itself. The MIC project, there's a new MIC project which has started in January 2025 with almost slightly more than half of the first phase of the project, of the program. And it has been generously funded by the European Union, including the new one as well. The new project the scope of the new project has been extended slightly and looking into potentially other CITES listed species. However, the human resources, etc., will be sort of same or less. So there is a potential issue of sustainable financial sustainability and operational sustainability of the MIC program. Then I'm going to talk about slightly the CITES dialogue meeting for the African elephant range states, which is 65.8. This is another critical issue for coordinating efforts among the African elephant range states. We had a meeting last year in Botswana, and CITES plays a crucial role basically in fostering these kind of dialogues. So the agenda, this document provides an update on that dialogue and the kind of the decisions that includes for adoption by the standing for the COP20 on topics like sustainable financing for conservation, coordination and harmonization of conditions of African elephant trading, etc. Now, moving on to a different topic altogether related to access to funding and capacity building for CITES. The document 11, access to funding, provides an update on the extra budgetary funding that we receive from various sources, which are actually very, very crucial for CITES initiatives and also mainly for capacity building purposes for our parties. There is a lot to be done, and there is a lot needed as well. Every year we need a lot of extra budgetary funding for building the capacities of the parties. In this document, what is important is for the first time we are presenting a resource mobilization strategy for the consideration of COP20 upon the agreement of the SC78, the Standing Committee. And this actually will aim to create the sustainable funding mechanisms to ensure the continuity of the work of the CITES. Then we have related to capacity building agenda item 21, which talks about the development of CITES integrated capacity building framework. And this capacity building framework is aligned with the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This work is actually undergoing. It is still a work in progress, and the CITES Secretariat is going to organize regional technical consultations on this topic. Agenda 22 provides an update on the capacity building activities that we have organized since COP19, and it provides the level of details of the activities at the national and regional levels. This slide talks about 3 different topics. I've tried to put all together here. So Agenda 51 talks about electronic systems and information technology. This topic is very important for our work on digital permitting processes for CITES. And we try to continue with support from the Standing Committee and the working group of the Standing Committee. We continue to develop guidelines for our parties to apply or implement electronic CITES permitting procedures. At this Standing Committee meeting, we will be submitting to the Standing Committee a guideline on the use of two-dimensional barcodes for CITES permits and certificates for their consideration. There are other interrelated issues on HS codes, data policy, digital data policy, etc., which will be part of this document. Agenda item 52 is talking about risk assessment and analysis for border control. This is really, again, a work in progress guideline that we have not been able to complete. We are still working on it, so this just provides an update on the document. 55 talks about transport of live specimens. The International Air Transport Authority's live animal regulations is one of the obligations for the parties to comply with when transporting live specimens. And this is the first time we will be providing an update that the Secretariat has basically acquired digital licenses for some of our developing country parties, and that is the update we'll be providing on that. Now moving on to the CITES Tree Species Program. The CITES Tree Species Program has entered a new phase. You might as well know that generously funded by Germany, we have a new project on CITES Tree Species Program for 6 years. And this will be, we will provide an initial update on the initial implementation, and we will seek guidance from the Plans and Standing Committee about we will have some decisions about the Plans and Standing Committee guidance about having a permanent CTSP program if possible. Then we talk about agenda item 25, where we have the CITES Global Youth Network. Since last Standing Committee meetings, we have seen a growing interest on the global youth participation in CITES issues. And we are going to organize a meeting in Singapore in this year about it, led by Singapore. And we will have in this document amendments to the resolution 17.5 on youth engagement for the consideration of the Standing Committee. Finally, we have this CITES Gender Action Plan. This document provides an update on the revisions and the comments received on the CITES Gender Action Plan for the consideration of the Standing Committee. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salehin. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Karen Gaynor, who is representing the science unit of the CITES Secretariat, and she'll give some highlights on the scientific issues. You have the floor, Karen.
Yes, thank you, Haruko, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Haruko has mentioned, my name is Karen Gaynor. I am the Scientific Support Officer for Fauna in the Science Unit at the Secretariat. Unfortunately, our chief was not available today, so it gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Science Unit to highlight some of the agenda items that are of a scientific nature that will be discussed at the Standing Committee meeting. And as Haruko mentioned earlier, let's see if no, the other way, sorry. Here we go. As Haruko mentioned earlier, we have a compendium of a lot of the agenda items that the Animals and Plants Committee had been covering, and this is all presented in agenda item 6, which is a report of the chairs of the Animals and Plants Committee. This is a very large document, covers 50 pages and 27 agenda items. And this document reports on the activities that have been carried out by the scientific committees, so the Plants and the Animals Committee, and on the items that are of relevance to the Standing Committee. There are some additional items these committees have covered, but they will be reported straight to the Conference of the Parties. And the Animals and Plants Committee have contributed to several other agenda items that are on the agenda for Standing Committee as well. But this document focuses on items that are not reported in a separate agenda item. The document is divided into 3 sections. The first of this is plants, of which there are 7 items. And I would like to highlight 3 of these here. The first is on the cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, where the Plants Committee has agreed to submit to the COP draft decisions to draft revisions to Resolution Conf 16.5 on cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation of the CBD. The second one is agar wood producing taxa concerning Aquilaria species and Gyrinop species. And this reflects proposed revisions to Resolution Conf 16.10 on implementation of the Convention for Agar wood producing taxa. And these revisions were proposed by the Animals Committee at its meeting in July. Thirdly, we have rosewood tree species. And this item includes consideration of a report prepared by the Secretariat on the global conservation and trade of CITES-listed rosewood species, again by the Plants Committee. The second section concerns the animals items, of which there are 10. One of these is the joint CITES CMS African Carnivores Initiative, where it is reported that the Animals Committee agreed on two priority activities: the development of trade resource kits for lions and leopards, and these are based on the trade resource kit for cheetahs, and the development of an African lion inventory and an African lion database. In addition, there are a number of items that reflected on reports of workshops that have been organized by the Secretariat during the intersessional period. And these included workshops on aquatic species listed in the appendices, songbird trade and conservation of amphibians. And lastly, there are 10 joint items relating to plants and animals, including non-detriment findings, which is of course fundamental to CITES, and it highlights the preliminary guidance on NDF that has been developed through a collaborative process involving parties, NGOs, the Animals and Plants Committees, and other experts. The next item is Agenda Item 19 on CITES and forests. And the Standing Committee will consider the progress that has been made with the implementation of decisions relating to CITES and forests, including an interdisciplinary study initiated by the Secretariat to assist decision-making processes on the future of any initiative relating to CITES and forests. Importantly, the Standing Committee will discuss two review processes that are initiated by the Animals and Plants Committees. And these reviews can result in compliance measures, including recommendations to suspend trade. So the first of these is the review of significant trade or in specimens of Appendix 2 species, or RST. There are 3 documents that the Standing Committee will consider. The first is an overview. So this includes details of the 90 cases or species country combinations that are currently subject to the review. Of these, 66 cases relate to fauna and 24 relate to flora. The second document is a report on the implementation of recommendations of the Animals Committee. So the Standing Committee will consider the progress made by the countries that have fauna cases, look at the progress in the implementation of recommendations from the Animals Committee, and 5 of these species country combinations have been in the review, excuse me, since before COP19, while 14 cases were selected after COP19. And the third document is the implementation of the recommendations of the Plants Committee. Again, the Standing Committee will consider progress in the implementation for 16 species country combinations currently in review, including 8 RST cases for Pterocarpus erinaceus or African teak, which will be considered under the expedited application of Article XIII for West African rosewood, including the outcomes of a regional workshop that took place in September last year in Douala in Cameroon. The next item is eels or anguilla species. 2 documents will be considered by the Standing Committee. The first of these is a report from the Standing Committee's Intersessional Working Group, and the Standing Committee will discuss some new draft decisions and a potential new resolution on anguillid eels, so that's all anguilla species, noting that currently it's only Anguilla anguilla, the European eel, that is listed in CITES. But this proposed new resolution and decision has been developed by this intersessional working group with inputs from the Animals Committee. And the second document is a report of the Secretariat on illegal trade in European eel. including an analysis of the data of eel seizures from 2018 to 2022, as reported by parties in their annual illegal trade reports. And the Standing Committee will be invited to encourage parties affected by illegal trade in eels to actively engage in any operations and targeted activities aimed at addressing this issue. And slightly out of order, this should have come first. This refers to, before eels, this refers to the second review process. It is similar to RST, but this is a task undertaken by the Animals Committee, and it concerns captive breeding. So there are two documents for the Standing Committee to consider here. Document 35.1, the Standing Committee will review actions taken by parties to implement recommendations of the Animals Committee and the Standing Committee in order to ensure compliance with the obligations of Article 3 and 4 and Article 4, Paragraph 4 and 5 of the Convention as it relates to captive bred specimens. So the committee will consider updates concerning the 14 species country combinations that are currently under review under this resolution. And secondly, the Standing Committee will consider the analysis of the objectives and processes outlined in this resolution and the resolution on the review of significant trade and consider the comparison between these two resolutions. The next agenda item we wanted to highlight was sharks and rays, where the Standing Committee will consider 3 documents. A report from the Intersessional Working Group, which includes recommended amendments to the Rapid Guide on Making Legal Acquisition Findings and draft decisions, for example, the need for guidance on the control and monitoring of stockpiles of shark parts and derivatives. The second document is a report from the Animals Committee, and it has recommendations and draft decisions from the Animals Committee, including an invitation to parties to share information relating to making NDFs, or non-detriment findings, identification of CITES listed shark products in trade, and capacity building needs. And it requests the Secretariat to collaborate with RFMOs, or Regional Fisheries Management Organisations, and FAO on specific matters. And lastly, there's a report of the Secretariat which updates on work conducted by the Secretariat and includes the results of the study entitled Deep Diving into Shark Catch and Trade Mismatches and the resulting recommendations and draft decisions from that work. And lastly, there are proposals for the inclusion of catch locations in reporting and the inclusion of the ENDF, or electronic NDF tool, on the CITES website. And 2 final ones that I want to mention concerning flora. The first is Brazil wood, where the Standing Committee will consider the draft report on Brazil wood, Pau Brasilia echinata bows, fine-tuning traceability solutions. The key outputs of this report include an overview of options for establishing a traceability system for Pau Brasilia echinata, the bows from the species, including marking individual bows, issuing certifications, and creating centralized databases. Also identifies enforcement efforts, stockpile management, and capacity building needs, highlighting challenges such as identifying illegal stocks and the lack of a standardized global traceability system. And finally, it outlines a pathway for coordinated efforts between Brazil, major importers, and the private sector to ensure legal, sustainable, and traceable trade of Pau Brasilia echinata specimens. And lastly, annotation 15. For those who don't know, annotation is a note with the listing to exempt certain... Oh, sorry, I hadn't moved it on. My apologies. Oh. A note with the listing to exempt certain products, including musical instruments. So the Standing Committee will consider the Secretariat's draft report on the evaluation of the conservation impacts of CITES exemptions for rosewood tree species of the genera Dalbergia and Guibourtia, which are covered by this annotation. And the key findings of this draft report are that the exemptions for musical instruments of these species have proven effective in regulating trade by focusing on trade regulations on commodities that first enter trade from range states. and that exemptions under annotation 15 for these species have had a low conservation impact, noting, however, that gaps in traceability persist, particularly for raw materials that transition into exempted products. So these are just a few of the scientific highlights. I do have some colleagues in the room if there are any questions relating to any of these matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'd like to now give the floor to Sophie Flensborg, who is the Chief of the Legal Unit of the CITES Secretariat, who will highlight some compliance and legal issues that will be dealt with at the Standing Committee meeting. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Before I move into the substantive items, I thought I'd just give you a piece of information that I just received from a colleague, and that is that no parties have submitted credentials for the meeting next week, except for India. That's the only party we've actually received a proper credential from. The letters of credentials are important in order to determine that the people present in the room are actually representing their government and have the mandate from their government to represent them at the meeting. It's particularly important for the members of the committee, and perhaps I'll just briefly recap who are the members of the committee for the benefit of everybody. So from the African region, there are a total of 16 members and 3 additional non-voting members. So the 16 members are from the 6 regions of CITES, and from Africa, it's Morocco, Madagascar, Kenya, and Chad. From the Asian region, the members are Indonesia, Kuwait, and Japan. From the Central and South American and the Caribbean region, the members are Brazil, Honduras, and the Dominican Republic. From the European region, it's United Kingdom, Georgia, Belgium, and Poland. From North America, it's United States of America, the chair. And from Oceania, it's New Zealand. The non-voting members, as we call them, the non-regional members, are the depositary government Switzerland, the previous host Panama, and the future host Uzbekistan. Let me also just quickly recap the rules of procedure. Rule 5 establishes that any member, so any voting member, any of these regional representatives, shall, before exercising the voting rights of the members at a meeting, have been granted credentials by or on behalf of a proper authority. And the authorities that can grant these credentials are the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the competent minister, or the management authority authorized to communicate with the Secretariat, or the permanent missions. So just to let you know, there are quite a range of authorities that can sign these letters of credentials, but it's actually quite important. While the committee is always making all efforts to agree on everything by consensus, it cannot be excluded that a vote may happen, and as it did at the last meeting, and therefore only those members of the committee with proper credentials will be allowed to exercise the vote. So I thought I'd just give you that little update on where we are with the credentials. As my colleague Haruko Suku mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, the deadline was yesterday. Of course, we will accept credentials at any time, but it just facilitates the proceedings of the meeting if they come in advance. So having given you this piece of information, let me move into the substantive issues that my unit, the legal unit, is responsible for at the meeting. We have over 40 or around 40 items. Of course, we have no time to go through 40 items at this briefing. So we have selected a few that we thought might be of your interest. But of course, if you have questions on any of the other agenda items, all my colleagues are here and we will try to answer any questions you might have. So I will be speaking on CITES and people, compliance, regulation of trade, and other legal matters. And we'll start with CITES and people, and perhaps we can make it a little bit bigger. There are 3 issues here that I'd like to speak to. And first, before we move into the actual items, I just want to recall that CITES sits at the intersection of trade, environment, and development, and hence is also about sustainable development and about contributing to providing sustainable livelihoods to people and communities. And the first item in this respect that we will discuss a little bit is the engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities. We have had since 2016, the COP in South Africa, work ongoing on how to better engage. At the time, we called it rural communities. Now we call it indigenous people and local communities in the works of the convention. And during the past intersessional period, there has been an intersessional working group led by Canada, who's tried to see if more guidance could be provided on engaging such communities. And they have come up with a short non-binding guidance that they would present to the Standing Committee for its endorsement and submission to the Conference of the Parties. On agenda item 28, the Secretariat and the Intersessional Working Group led by Zambia and Peru are reporting on work undertaken by this working group on how to ensure that trade in CITES listed species has a benefit for such communities, local, rural, and indigenous peoples' communities. And they have come up with 6 strategies that can assist in maximizing these benefits, and will invite the Standing Committee to recognize these 6 strategies and propose to the Conference of the Parties that it make a note of these 6 strategies in the resolution on CITES and livelihoods. It will also invite the Standing Committee, so the Standing Committee is also invited to agree on further work to explore the use of certification and labeling systems for products from such communities, subject to external funds. Finally, the Secretariat is reporting on its work on demand reduction to combat illegal trade, where the Standing Committee is invited to note the progress in promoting the use of the CITES guidance on demand reduction strategies to combat illegal trade, which is focusing on targeted campaigns to achieve behavior change by targeted group of consumers. So this is a whole sort of stepwise approach whereby you would identify who are the consumers of wildlife products that may come from illegal trade, and how can you incite them to change their behavior to not demand such products. And further, the committee is invited to agree on the continuation of this work, again, subject to funding. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about the National Legislation Project, which is a project that's been going on since 1992, under which the CITES Secretariat has a mandate to review the national legislation for the implementation of the Convention of the Parties to the Convention. So the Secretariat reviews the legislation and assess whether this will whether this complies with the 4 minimum requirements that have been established by the Conference of the Parties and stems directly from the Convention. And it's a great honor and pleasure to be able to announce that we have considered that 5 more parties have such adequate legislation, and has therefore been placed in what we call the Category 1 of this national legislation project, and that's Andorra, Botswana, Lao People's Democratic Republic, Sierra Leone, and Tunisia. And this now means that almost 2/3 of the parties have adequate legislation, and a quarter still misses some elements, but have some legislation in place, which is quite good news. So we're now at 117 parties with adequate legislation. So in this document, the Secretariat is invited to note the progress or commend these 5 parties and note the progress in other parties, and also to adopt certain compliance measures with respect to parties that have not made sufficient substantive progress, including a possible recommendation to suspend trade for commercial purposes with Comoros, Lebanon, and Mongolia until they have taken substantive steps to put in place national legislation, and issue formal warnings to a number of other parties listed on the screen. Finally, the Standing Committee has asked us to look into developing some guidance on what to do in situations or in exceptional circumstances where the convention cannot be applied properly because of conflict. And we are providing some elements for this guidance in this document and inviting the Standing Committee to agree to this guidance. Moving on to agenda item 32, which concerns the submission of annual reports. It's a bit slow, this thing. There is an obligation in the convention to submit annual reports on trade in CITES listed species regulated by CITES in Appendix 1, 2, and 3. And parties are supposed to submit this annual reports every year by the 31st of October. And the Conference of the Parties have recommended in a resolution that if such reports have not been submitted for 3 consecutive years, the other parties should not authorize any trade with parties that have not submitted their annual reports without having provided adequate justification. At this point in time, we have identified 7 parties, I think, that have not submitted their annual report for 3 consecutive years. And these are Bahamas, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Malawi, Mali, Paraguay, and Samoa. Unless we hear from them within 60 days of the meeting, there will be a notification going out recommending that parties do no longer accept trade with these parties. So I thought I'll just bring this to your attention as well. Moving on to the compliance matters that the Standing Committee is handling under Article 13 of the Convention, and in accordance with the resolution 14.3 on the CITES procedures. This resolution contains an important principle that I'd like to just draw to your attention or recall, and that is that in CITES we're taking a supportive and non-adversarial approach towards non-compliance with the aim of achieving long-term compliance. And I think this is important to always keep in mind. We have under this agenda item 33, 13 documents. So we're not going to go through all of them in detail, but I'd like to highlight a few. And the first is the overview document 33.1, which reports on the implementation of the recommendations that were adopted by the committee last year with respect to the European Union and the United Kingdom on trade in specimens that have been produced in captive breeding facilities, specimens of species in Appendix 1. And so we have a brief update on where they are with implementing the recommendations of the Standing Committee adopted last year. We also have an update on the trade in 3 parrots between Brazil, Dominica, and Germany, and we're inviting some of these parties to try to come to an agreement and understanding on how to report on this trade. We have an update on matters that we had identified at SC77, which regards India, Suriname, and Vietnam, and providing an update on that. Vietnam I'll come back to because we actually were able to undertake a mission to Vietnam, so I'll come back to that in a minute. And also some new compliance matters with respect to Cambodia, Guyana, and the ocean white-tip shark. Finally, there are a few additional topics in this covered by this document. One is a new decision for the Standing Committee after the next meeting of the Conference of the Parties to develop guidance on the scope and application of recommendations to suspend trade to ensure that there is a shared understanding of how these recommendations are to be understood. And also the development and adoption of a compliance action plan template to assist parties that are subject to these compliance processes under Article 13. So the Standing Committee will be invited to note the progress and to adopt additional recommendations related to Suriname, Cambodia, and other matters. This document, so this is the overview document. The next document is 33.2 on the expedited application of Article 13 for West African rosewood, and my colleague Karen Gaynor touched a little bit upon that, because the workshop that the Secretariat did in Douala in September was also to help the parties that are in this process, the 16 range states for Theocarpus erinaceus, to better implement Article 4 of the Convention with respect to review of significant trade and legal acquisition findings. So there is an update on the progress made by these parties and a suggestion to renew the recommendation for most of these parties. Moving on to a number of the other documents with regard to Bangladesh, Guinea, Laos, PDR, Nigeria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Secretariat is providing an update on the important efforts undertaken by these parties towards achieving compliance with the Convention and inviting this Standing Committee to note this progress and renew or adopt new recommendations, some of these with compliance measures. Okay, moving on. As I mentioned, we've just been to Vietnam, but we have also traveled to Cameroon, Ecuador, and Peru to make an assessment on site on the measures taken to come into compliance and achieve and implement the recommendations adopted by the Standing Committee. So colleagues went to Cameroon and noted great progress on the management and trade in African teak, so Theocarpus elata, and are providing an update on this. With respect to Ecuador and Peru, the problems relate more to the sustainability and legality to some extent of the export quotas for the export of trade in shark specimens in Ecuador, but also some issues related to the legislation in Peru. And so the Secretariat is inviting the Standing Committee to adopt some recommendations in this respect. And finally, as I mentioned, the Secretariat was just in Vietnam at the beginning of this year and had a mission looking on trade in CITES listed species involving Vietnam, and were not able to identify any compliance matters to be addressed under Article 13, but certain improvements that could be made, and are making recommendations in this regard. Noting that Vietnam is currently in a number of other processes, but there is nothing that we need to look after in Article 13. Finally, I should also just mention that Madagascar has provided a document on Madagascar has provided an update on the implementation of the COP19 decisions, and noting good progress on trying to inventory and mark some of the stockpiles that are in the government control. And the Standing Committee is invited to note the progress made by Madagascar on the implementation of these decisions. Couple of more, one more compliance matter is the National Ivory Action Plans. That is this process that you may have heard of, where parties are requested to develop National Ivory Action Plans to focus efforts to combat illegal trade in ivory, in elephant ivory. There are currently 13 parties in this process, and all of these parties have submitted progress report with the implementation of their NIAP to the Secretariat, and the Secretariat is reporting on this to the Standing Committee. And the committee is invited to agree that Cambodia and Malaysia has completed their NIAP and therefore can exit the process. A number of other parties have made progress, and the committee is invited to note this progress. And finally, there are 3 parties where the committee considers that there is insufficient progress, where the Secretariat, considers that there is insufficient progress and invites the committee to issue a compliance measure, and these concern Congo, Qatar, and Togo. Finally, there are a second document in which the Secretariat reports on a review of this NIAP process and invites the Standing Committee to make to consider some recommendation in this regard. Moving on to a couple of other legal matters, but as I said, this is only a very small selection. I thought I'd mention the rules of procedure of the Conference of the Parties, because an intersessional working group led by the chair of the Standing Committee has developed some proposal to amend one of the rules of procedure to have a slightly more open process when there are amendment proposals that concern the same taxa. So there are several proposals to amend the appendices concerning the same species or group of species. This proposal for amending the rules of procedure will allow all of these proposals to be introduced before any of them are discussed and decided upon. At present, the way it is handled at the Conference of the Parties is that one proposal is introduced, discussed and decided upon, and if it means that the other proposals cannot also be adopted because they're overlapping, the others are not even introduced or discussed. That is proposed to be amended by this working group. There are a number of other small amendments, but I won't go into the details here. In document 47, the Secretariat is presenting new guidance on legal acquisition findings for captive breeding stocks in facilities that breed CITES listed species for commercial purposes, and the Standing Committee is invited to agree on this guidance. And finally, in document 49, the Secretariat is reporting on activities undertaken to support parties implementing the convention with respect to specimens taken in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And additionally, it's updating its analysis of the linkages between the convention and the new agreement on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And in view of this new agreement, the ABNJ and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the practices that seem to differ slightly between the parties with regard to the implementation of the convention for specimens of species taken in areas beyond national jurisdiction, the Secretariat is proposing a process to review the resolution on IFS, and this is going to go to the Conference of the Parties at the end of the year, but for the Standing Committee to consider whether such a process should be initiated. Finally, one more item, and this is, funnily enough, under me, even though it is concerning the taxonomy and nomenclature of the African elephant, but it is because there is an agreement on the scientific aspect. So the Animals Committee has already agreed that there are two species of African elephant. There is the savanna elephant, the Africana loxodonta, and there is the forest elephant, Africana cyclotics. So there are two species, and the only question is how is the Conference of the Parties going to reflect this in the appendices? And the Secretariat has proposed 3 different options for reflecting this in the appendices, and the Standing Committee will be invited to consider these options and see if they can agree on one of them. Additionally, the Secretariat has updated its analysis on the implications for recognizing the second elephant species, and is basically coming to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter how you reflect it, and there are very few resolutions that need to be updated due to if the second African elephant species is recognized. Finally, the Secretary is also reiterating that this is a non-substantive update of the appendices, and it doesn't need an amendment proposal. It can be done by an agreement by the Conference of the Parties without anyone having to submit a proper amendment proposal under Article 15 of the Convention. That was a lot. There is about 30 more agenda items, but I think I'll leave it at this for now and hand over to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for compacting 40+ agenda items into a very short presentation. I'd like to now hand over the floor to Mr. Bernd Janse van Rensburg, who is the Chief of the Enforcement Unit of the CITES Secretariat, for agenda items under his responsibility.
Thank you very much, Haruko, and also from my side, good morning to all of you. And I think, as you have heard from some of the presentations already, enforcement matters and combating illegal trade in wildlife will again be significant matters of discussion at this upcoming Standing Committee meeting. Now, from my side, I would like to start with document 38.1, which is the document on enforcement matters. And in this document, the Secretariat basically reports on numerous issues related to enforcement. The first is on addressing corruption, and the document shows that corruption continues to pose a significant challenge in the context of addressing wildlife crime. And the document also highlights some of the cases that occurred since the last Standing Committee meeting. But it's also welcomed in the document that it seems that our parties are increasingly taking strict action when corrupt practices are detected. The document also deals with addressing illicit financial flows from wildlife crime, and it highlights that a number of activities and initiatives were mobilized since SC77 in this regard. Now, this remains a matter of very high priority, and it is essential that financial crime investigations be integrated into the investigation of crimes involving wildlife. There's also information in the document on the CITES illegal trade database and data analysis, and the document highlights that as of November 2024, almost 130,000 seizure records reported by our parties through their annual illegal trade reports were included in the database. Now, this data is available to our parties through a data dissemination platform, and it's a valuable resource for our parties to draw upon to inform their decision-making and their law enforcement responses. Now, maintenance of the CITES illegal trade database is currently subject to external resources, and the Secretariat notes in the document the need for sustainable funding to maintain this database, and also that the Secretariat intends to convey the budgetary implications to COP20 for discussion there. Now, the document also addresses a number of other matters. This includes work conducted and ongoing regarding wildlife crime linked to the internet, matters related to Tibetan antelope, and some other matters. And amongst others, the Standing Committee is invited to consider proposed amendments to Resolution COP 17.6, Rev COP19, which deals with addressing corruption, as well as Resolution COP 11.3, Rev COP19, on compliance and enforcement. And in addition, also to consider proposed new draft decisions on wildlife crime linked to the internet for submission to COP20. And let me just see what happened here. There we go. The next agenda item I would like to touch on is agenda item 33.12 on totoabas. Now, there were two documents submitted for this agenda item. The first one is document 33.12.1, which is a document prepared by the Secretariat, and reporting is provided in it on missions the Secretariat conducted to China, Mexico, and the United States of America, and associated findings made during this mission. There's also a comprehensive study on totoaba and vaquita that were conducted in accordance with a decision from COP19, and this study was completed and is available in an annex to the document. The Secretariat also reported in the document on progress made by Mexico with the implementation of its compliance action plan on totoaba. Then the second document, document 33.12.2, is a document submitted by Mexico as chair of the Trilateral Enforcement Contact Group, or the TECG, between Mexico, China, and the United States of America. And in this document, it is reported that the terms of reference for the Trilateral Enforcement Contact Group was finalized, and that this group is now operational. And the document also elaborates on activities conducted to date related to and by the Trilateral Enforcement Contact Group. Now, with regard to these two documents, the Standing Committee is amongst others invited to request China, Mexico and the United States of America to, in their ongoing activities, consider the recommendations resulting from the Secretariat's missions. Also, to welcome the continued progress made by Mexico with implementation of its Compliance Action Plan, but also to request Mexico to provide further reporting on some aspects in the Compliance Action Plan to the 79th meeting of the Standing Committee that will be held immediately before COP in November 2025. The committee is further invited to consider proposed draft decisions on Totoabas for submission to COP20, and also to welcome the collaborative efforts of China, Mexico, and the United States of America through the Trilateral Enforcement Contact Group, and to urge them to continue these efforts. The next document is document 38.3 on the Task Force on Illegal Trade in Specimens of CITES listed tree species. Now, in 2022, the Secretariat convened a task force on illegal trade in specimens of CITES listed tree species, and the outcomes of this task force meeting provided a strong basis for our parties to take action to address this illegal trade. And COP19 adopted the decision 1989, that encouraged parties to fully implement the measures and activities outlined in the task force outcome document. Now, in the document to SC78, the Secretariat report on information provided by parties on their implementation of Decision 1989, as well as on other related matters. And the Standing Committee is invited in the document to note the information that parties provided, to propose the renewal of Decision 1989 to COP20, as well as to consider proposed draft decisions on this topic for submission to COP20. Oops. Sorry, the slide. There we go. Looks like we're back on track. The next document, I think there's a problem on the slide, says 29. It should be 39. Document 39 on wildlife crime enforcement support in Western Central Africa. Now, again, for this agenda item, there were two documents submitted. Document 39.1. This is a document that was prepared by the Standing Committee Intersessional Working Group on wildlife crime enforcement support in Western Central Africa. And the reporting is provided on work done by the working group regarding the potential establishment of a CITES enforcement fund or other mechanisms that could provide sustainable financial support to combat wildlife crime. Then there's document 39.2. This is a document prepared by the Secretariat in which reporting is provided on the implementation of COP19 decisions regarding Western Central Africa. And the Standing Committee are amongst others invited to note the conclusions that were reached by the working group, to welcome the activities undertaken by parties in Western Central Africa, and the more support that was provided to these parties, and also to consider proposed draft decisions on wildlife crime enforcement support in Western Central Africa for submission to COP20. The next document is document 41 on marine turtles, and this is actually a report of a Standing Committee Intersessional Working Group on marine turtles. The working group conducted a review of various documents and information available, with a particular focus on the compliance and enforcement aspects relevant to marine turtles, and to propose amendments to Resolution Conf 19.5 on conservation of and trade in marine turtles. And the Standing Committee is invited to consider the proposed amendments to the resolution for submission to COP20. Then agenda item number 43 on Asian big cats. There were 2 documents submitted for this agenda item, both of them by the Secretariat. Document 43.1, in this document, reporting is provided on the implementation of Resolution CONF 12.5 Ref COP19 on conservation of and trade in tigers and other Appendix 1 big cat species, as well as on the decisions on Asian big cats. And then document 43.2 provides reporting on further work undertaken by the Secretariat regarding Asian big cats in captivity, as well as parties with facilities keeping Asian big cats in captivity that may be of concern, and other matters. The Secretariat also report that missions have now been conducted to China and the United States of America, in addition to the missions conducted prior to SC77, and the Secretariat elaborates on the findings made during these missions, as well as on further work relevant to parties to which missions were conducted prior to SC77. And regarding these 2 documents, the Standing Committee are, amongst others, invited to note the information provided by parties on their implementation of the resolution and decisions on Asian big cats, to note a report by Chechnya regarding the inspection of a facility that the Secretariat could not visit during its mission, to note a recommendation by the Animals Committee regarding guidance to parties on how to evaluate the conservation aspects of tiger captive breeding facilities, to consider proposed recommendations directed to China and the United States of America, as well as to consider draft decisions on tigers in captivity for submission to COP20. The next document is the document on rhinos. Now, the report of the Secretariat focuses on the parties most affected by rhino poaching and rhino on trafficking, to whom decisions 19117, 19118, and 19119 are directed. And you'll see the parties concerned, their names there on the slide. Now, in addition, the document also focuses on Angola and Namibia as parties that are affected by emerging issues of concern. And the document highlights the need for parties to scale up their efforts to collect samples from seized rhinos for forensic analysis. The Secretariat also report that it is in the process of putting in place arrangements for the CITES Rhinoceros Enforcement Task Force for this meeting to be convened within the first half of this year. Now, the Standing Committee is invited to request the parties concerned by the decisions I mentioned to take the observations and conclusions of the Secretariat in the document into consideration in their implementation of these respective decisions, to encourage Angola and Vietnam to strengthen their bilateral engagement, to request Namibia to continue reviewing trends associated with illegal killing of rhinos and illegal trade in rhino on specimens affecting it, to request parties to scale up their efforts to collect samples from rhino on seized within their territories for forensic analysis, and also to fully implement Decision 19115, which is relevant to the collection of forensic samples, and to invite the Secretariat to take into consideration the outcomes of the CITES Rhinoceros Enforcement Task Force to be convened in its report to COP20, since it will only be possible to convene this meeting after SC78. Then lastly, document 38.2 on the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, or ICWIC as it is commonly known. In this document, the Secretariat reports on ICWIC's activities. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with ICWIC, ICWIC is the collaborative effort of 5 intergovernmental organizations: the CITES Secretariat, Interpol, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank, and the World Customs Organization. And together, these partners provide coordinated support to authorities around the world and from across the criminal justice system. Now, from late 2023 onwards, the consortium initiated the implementation of the ICWIC Vision 2030. Now, the framework of the ICWIC Vision provides a roadmap that are implemented through 2 4-year strategic action plans to enable addressing wildlife crime in a holistic and a comprehensive manner. And ICWIC continues to work closely with our partners, playing a critical role in further strengthening responses to wildlife crime. And in this document, the Standing Committee is invited to encourage parties to actively engage in ICWIC activities and initiatives, and to reach out to the consortium for support, and also to welcome the generous contributions from donor parties towards the ICWIC vision and its associated strategic action plan. And we are very grateful to these donors for their support. Now, there are also numerous other documents related to enforcement and illegal trade, as you can see there on the slide, but I think time will not allow me to go through all of them. So I invite you to go and also look at those if they are of interest to you. So with that, Haruko, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. With that, I think concludes our general briefing presentations from the CITES Secretariat. Before I open the floor for any questions, either in person or online, I'd like to give the floor to Sophie for some minor corrections.
Thank you very much. It's incredible how efficient this online briefing works, because since I said we had no credentials, we received 4, but we actually had received many more. They were just, which I just hadn't received the updated information. So I'm pleased to inform you that we have all the credentials except for Indonesia and Georgia, and we invite them to provide their credentials. So no panic. We have them all. They were just it would just not reach my my information yet. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. Now, I think I would like to open the floor first to any of the mission representatives who are here in person, if there are any questions or comments you would like to make. You're also welcome to do so in French, since we have some Francophone members of the Secretariat. Are there also any online questions?
So far online, the questions were about the documents that were presented today. So just reminding everybody, especially those who came in late, that all the documents will be available on the webpage of the event.
Thank you, Diana. I'd like to also remind you that there's an annotated agenda, which is a compilation of all of the working documents, just the excerpts of the recommendations and the documents or proposed decisions or resolutions that are being proposed. Warning you that that annotated agenda in itself is over 200 pages. So whilst I can say that just looking at that document should give you the big overview of what the Standing Committee members are requested to consider, it's still a substantive document. So please refer to that. And if you'd like to know more of the details on the background that led to those recommendations, please go to the individual working documents of those agenda items. Okay, so with that, I'd like to very much thank you for your participation and for your taking time to attend the briefing in person and also online. And I would turn the floor back to Diana. Thank you.
Just bring to your attention that this afternoon we will be at Palais des Nations with our friends from UN Trade and Development to discuss outcomes related to trade of the UN Conference on Biodiversity. As you can see here, it's the slide announcing the event is on the screen. This event is also hybrid, so who is online can join by watching the YouTube channel. So we will be discussing outcomes related to trade of the UN Conference on Biodiversity COP16, which first segment concluded in Cali in October and will resume in Rome next month. Thank you. A few other opportunities, particularly for the member states here. Next week, we have a few other events coming up. We are discussing the environmental agenda of the Human Rights Council and a few other. We are also having a session in preparation of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions Conference of the Parties that is going to take place also in Geneva in a few months, and there will be various events. The agenda of the Chemicals and Waste Cluster is very busy this year with a lot of negotiations taking place in Geneva and around the world. So there will be a lot of sessions coming up around these topics. And of course, after your standing committee and as we get closer to COP20, we will also organize a briefing in Geneva in preparation of the CITES COP that will take place in Uzbekistan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I look forward to seeing you next week at CICG. And thank you for your attention and your time. Have a good rest of the day.